Junkyard Dog was one of wrestling's most charismatic superstars, whose chain-wearing persona and infectious energy made him the first black wrestler to truly break wrestling's color barrier. He went from working in the Louisiana territory to becoming one of the most popular wrestlers in America, filling arenas across the country with fans chanting his name. However, in 1998, on what should have been one of the happiest days of his life, his daughter's graduation, Junkyard Dog would fall asleep at the wheel and never wake up again. In 1952, Sylvester Ritter was born in the small town of Wadesboro, North Carolina. Ritter had dreams that had nothing to do with body slams or championship gold. Football was his first love, and he pursued it with the same intensity that would later make him a wrestling icon. At Fayetteville State University, Ritter wasn't just good, he was exceptional. His collegiate career culminated with honorable mention All-American honors, a testament to his natural athleticism and dedication. His performance was so impressive that the university would later induct him into their Sports Hall of Fame. Like many standout college athletes, Ritter had his sights set on professional football. In April 1976, that dream became reality when he signed with the Green Bay Packers. Here was his shot at NFL glory, the pinnacle of athletic achievement for any football player. But sometimes life has other plans. Within just 6 months, Ritter's football career was over before it truly began. Devastating knee and back injuries sent him from the practice field to the sidelines, and by October, the Packers had released him. In half a year, his lifelong ambition had crumbled. For many athletes, this kind of setback becomes the defining tragedy of their lives, the peak they never quite reached. But for Ritter, it was just the beginning of an unexpected journey. With his football dreams destroyed, Ritter needed a new path. Professional wrestling, with its combination of athleticism and showmanship, offered an alternative route. But breaking into the business wasn't easy. His early days in the ring were marked by uncertainty as he cycled through forgettable personas like Leroy Rochester and Big Dad with audiences. The turning point came when he ventured north to Calgary's notorious Stampede Wrestling promotion. Under the punishing tutelage of Stu Hart, whose basement dungeon training facility was infamous for breaking down even the toughest athletes, Ritter began transforming from failed football player to legitimate wrestler. The Hart training system was brutal but effective, teaching wrestlers not just moves, but survival. Despite the harsh conditions, Ritter thrived in Calgary. His talent quickly became apparent as he captured the North American Championship twice, a sign that promoters saw something special in this athletic newcomer. These formative years in Stampede Wrestling weren't just about collecting accolades, they were about learning the psychology of wrestling, how to tell stories in the ring, and how to make fans care about the person behind the performance. While Ritter was developing his craft in Canada, a wrestling visionary named Bill Watts was building his Mid-South wrestling territory in Louisiana. Watts had been searching for someone who could challenge wrestling's unwritten racial rules, someone with enough charisma to transcend the industry's deeply entrenched biases. When Grizzly Smith, one of Watts' associates, spotted Ritter performing in Stampede Wrestling, he immediately recognized the raw potential in the former football player. What caught Watts' attention wasn't just Ritter's impressive physique or his growing in-ring skills. It was something far rarer and more valuable: natural charisma that connected with audiences on a visceral level. Here was a performer who could potentially redraw the industry's racial boundaries through sheer force of personality. Despite initial struggles to find the right presentation, Ritter's magnetic presence was undeniable. Charisma alone wouldn't make a wrestling superstar. It needed the perfect character to channel it through. What happens when you take raw talent, add a dog collar and chain, then blast queens, another one bites the dust through arena speakers? You get a cultural phenomenon that would shatter wrestling's racial barriers forever. Bill Watts was a visionary when it came to character creation. He saw Ritter's potential and transformed him into the Junkyard Dog, complete with a dog collar, chain, and initially, a cart filled with junk that he'd push to the ring. This wasn't just another wrestling gimmick. It was a complete reimagining of what a wrestling character could be. The presentation was jarring at first. Fans weren't immediately sure what to make of this unusual sight. But everything changed with the music. In an era when entrance themes weren't yet standard practice, Watts made the revolutionary decision to have Junkyard Dog enter arenas to Queen's Another One Bites the Dust. The moment those iconic bass notes hit, crowds went wild. The song became inseparably linked to his character, creating an electric atmosphere before he even stepped into view. This wasn't just background noise, it was an extension of his personality that signaled something special was about to happen. In the ring, Ritter didn't rely on technical wrestling prowess. His style was straightforward but effective, showcasing his incredible strength and physicality. Those thunderous headbutts became his signature, along with a power game that let him body slam opponents much larger than himself. What he lacked in technical finesse, he more than made up for with raw power and charisma that captivated audiences. What truly made Junkyard Dog special wasn't just his look or his music, it was how he connected with people. Black audiences finally saw themselves represented not as a stereotype or sideshow, but as the hero of the story. He wasn't positioned as the black wrestler. He was simply the top star who happened to be black. This subtle but crucial difference created an authentic connection with black fans who had never before seen themselves portrayed this way in wrestling. Yet his appeal wasn't limited by racial lines. White audiences cheered him just as fervently, drawn to his authentic charisma and everyman quality. In the racially charged atmosphere of the early 1980s South, this was nothing short of revolutionary. While society outside the arena might still be deeply divided, inside the building, fans of all races united in their support for the Junkyard Dog. Children, this wasn't just good business. It expanded wrestling's appeal beyond the traditional adult male demographic to entire families. Suddenly, kids were begging their parents to take them to see the Junkyard Dog, transforming wrestling events from adult entertainment to family outings. Despite his imposing physical presence, Junkyard Dog managed to be relatable. His blue-collar character resonated with working-class fans who saw themselves in his no-nonsense approach. He wasn't portrayed as a superhero or larger-than-life character. He was the tough, hard-working underdog that everyday people could identify with. This accessibility made fans feel personally invested in his victories and setbacks. The results were undeniable. The Junkyard Dog became a drawing phenomenon, packing arenas across the Mid-South territory and breaking attendance records everywhere he went. In an industry where success is measured by tickets sold, Ritter proved that audiences would turn out in record numbers to see a black superstar in the main event, something many promoters had considered impossible just years earlier. Drawing massive crowds was impressive enough, but what happened next would push the boundaries of professional wrestling into genuinely dangerous territory. When Michael Hayes and the Fabulous Freebirds blinded the Junkyard Dog with hair cream in 1980, they couldn't have predicted that their storyline would spiral into one where their own safety would be at serious risk. This wasn't just another wrestling angle. The genius of Mid-South storytelling became evident when they added a heart-wrenching personal element. Junkyard Dog couldn't see his newborn daughter because of his blindness. That single detail transformed what might have been a standard wrestling feud into something that touched fans on a visceral, emotional level. The audience wasn't just watching a wrestling show anymore. They were witnessing an attack on a new father's most basic right to see his child. The fan reaction was unlike anything the territory had ever experienced. The Superdome in New Orleans became his fortress, his home turf, where justice would eventually be served. A staggering 28,000 fans packed the arena to witness Junkyard Dog's revenge against the Freebirds, numbers that would make even major sports franchises envious. But the real story wasn't just happening inside the ring. Outside the arena, the situation grew increasingly volatile. The Freebirds weren't just playing bad guys, they were becoming targets of genuine hatred. Michael Hayes later recalled the terrifying reality of that period. You would fight from the ring to the dressing room. It wasn't a question of where you're going to get your ass whipped. It was a question of if you were going to make it to the dressing room. That wasn't wrestling hyperbole. The Freebirds required actual police escorts just to safely exit venues, with officers forming human shields against crowds that weren't simply playing along with the show anymore. How dangerous did it get? In one chilling incident, security discovered a fan with a bullet that had Freebirds carved into it. This wasn't kayfabe or wrestling theater. This was a genuine threat that revealed just how completely the line between fiction and reality had disappeared. What started as entertainment had morphed into something that put performers in legitimate danger. For wrestlers accustomed to getting booed as part of their job, this level of genuine hatred was unprecedented. Every night became a gamble, every arena a potential powder keg. The Freebirds couldn't simply walk to their cars after shows. They needed protection plans and escape routes. Their gimmick had worked too well, creating an atmosphere where their physical safety was genuinely at risk. The storytelling reached its climactic moment in a steel cage dog collar match at the Superdome. The stipulation wasn't just for show. It represented the only way to contain the explosive tension that had built between these rivals. When Ritter emerged victorious, the release of emotion from the crowd was cathartic, a collective expression of justice finally being served. The match itself served as the perfect culmination of wrestling's unique power. A carefully crafted story that caused real emotional investment from thousands of fans. What made this feud so special wasn't just the box office success, though that was undeniable. It was how it demonstrated wrestling's unique ability to blur the boundaries between performance and reality. In an age before the internet exposed the inner workings of the business, fans weren't just suspending disbelief. They were fully invested in the storyline as if it were completely real. The Freebirds weren't playing villains. To those fans, they were villains who had committed an unforgivable act against a beloved hero. For the wrestling business, the Ritter Freebirds feud proved something crucial. Emotional storytelling could drive attendance even more effectively than impressive moves or championship belts. It showed that wrestling at its best isn't just about athletic performances. It's about creating moments that connect with audiences on a human level. That human connection Ritter mastered in Mid-South would soon be tested on wrestling's largest platform. On August 10, 1984, Sylvester Ritter made the leap that forever altered his career trajectory, joining Vince McMahon's expanding World Wrestling Federation. The decision wasn't easy. In Mid-South, Ritter reigned as undisputed king, but McMahon's vision of national expansion promised something no territory could match: worldwide fame and financial security. When Ritter first walked down the aisle in a WWF arena, the response was electric. Fans who'd only heard rumors of this chain-wearing, head-butting sensation were finally seeing him in person. The dog had arrived on wrestling's biggest stage, and audiences immediately embraced him. What nobody expected, though, was that despite drawing reactions that rivaled or sometimes exceeded those of Hulk Hogan himself, Ritter would find himself occupying a different position in McMahon's hierarchy. The disparity between fan reaction and positioning became apparent at the inaugural WrestleMania on March 31, 1985. Ritter squared off against Intercontinental Champion. While Ritter won the match by countout, he didn't capture the championship. This pattern would repeat throughout his WWF only significant WWF accolade, winning the Wrestling Classic tournament. This single-night elimination tournament should have been a launching pad toward greater heights, but instead, it stood as an isolated achievement in an otherwise mid-card career. The contrast between his star power and his positioning puzzled many wrestling observers. How could a performer who connected so profoundly with audiences remain confined to the middle of the card? Became a question asked by wrestling journalists and fans alike. The answer revealed much about McMahon's vision for his company. While Ritter possessed undeniable charisma, he didn't fit the physical prototype McMahon was building his company around. In the WWF's expanding national landscape, the heavily muscled superhero physique of Hulk Hogan represented the company's ideal champion. The marketing of Ritter itself underwent a transformation under McMahon's direction. In Mid-South, Bill Watts had presented the dog as a physically imposing, tough-as-nails brawler who could withstand punishment and deliver devastating headbutts. The WWF version emphasized different qualities: his dancing, his smile, his interactions with young fans. While these elements had always been part of the Ritter character, they now became his primary identity rather than supplementary aspects of a dominant fighter. This isn't to say Ritter disappeared into obscurity. Far from it. He formed memorable partnerships with other beloved stars, particularly the legendary Andre the Giant. Together, they frequently battled the heel faction known as the Heenan family, creating entertaining segments that showcased his natural charisma and connection with the audience. These moments kept him relevant even without championship gold. One of his most memorable WWF moments came at WrestleMania 3 on March 29, 1987, when he faced the Regal Harley Race. Though Ritter lost the match itself, the aftermath became iconic. He stole Race's royal crown and robe, parading around the ring as over 93,000 fans in the Pontiac Silverdome roared their approval. The moment perfectly encapsulated Junkyard Dog's WWF tenure. He might not win the big matches, but he always won the crowd. For nearly 4 years, Ritter remained one of the WWF's most reliable performers and merchandise sellers. Children adored him, adults respected him, and his entrance still brought crowds to their feet night after night. He consistently drew large audiences and was featured prominently on WWF programming, despite rarely contending for major championships. In wrestling's hierarchy, he occupied a unique position, not the company's standard-bearer, but unquestionably one of its most beloved personalities. The same arenas that echoed with cheers for the Junkyard Dog masked the sound of his personal world crumbling. Behind that infectious smile and energetic ring presence that brought thousands to their feet night after night, Sylvester Ritter was fighting a battle far more challenging than any wrestling match. And it was a battle he was losing. His struggle with substance abuse began in the early 1980s, a time when drug use was rampant throughout the professional wrestling industry. While fans witnessed his charismatic performances in the ring, few knew that cocaine had become his drug of choice outside of it. What started as recreational use gradually evolved into a full-blown addiction that would ultimately derail his career. The grueling schedule of 1980s wrestling created the perfect storm for substance abuse. Performers were expected to wrestle multiple times per week, often driving hundreds of miles between shows with little recovery time. Many turned to various substances, alcohol, painkillers, and cocaine, just to manage the physical toll and maintain their energy levels. Ritter wasn't immune to these pressures. As his dependence deepened, so did the impact on his in-ring work. The explosive athleticism that had once defined his performances began to fade. Training sessions became less frequent. His once reliable timing grew inconsistent. While his natural charisma still shone through, those closest to the business could see the decline. Perhaps most troubling were reports that Ritter wasn't just using substances himself, but introducing them to others. According to several accounts, he allegedly gave Iron Sheik his first experience with crack cocaine, a particularly damaging incident given Sheik's subsequent well-documented struggles with addiction. By 1988, his cocaine problem had become impossible for the WWF to ignore. Despite remaining a fan favorite who still moved merchandise and drew crowds, the company made the difficult decision to release him. His unreliability had simply become too great a liability for a company pushing toward mainstream acceptance. The chaos in his professional life mirrored the turmoil in his personal relationships. His first marriage ended in extraordinary circumstances that included a kidnapping incident and Ritter suffering a gunshot injury. His second divorce proved equally devastating, but in different ways, financially stripping him of nearly everything he owned. In the aftermath, he lost his home, his car, and most of his possessions, leaving the once proud superstar emotionally shattered and economically vulnerable. When Ritter arrived in World Championship Wrestling, WCW, later in 1988, fans initially had reason for optimism. He debuted at Clash of the Champions 4, immediately reigniting his feud with Butch Reed. The familiar intensity was there, at least initially, but something had changed. His movements were slower, his timing off. The physical toll of his lifestyle was increasingly evident. WCW positioned him for a high-profile program with the legendary Ric Flair, but these matches exposed Junkyard Dog's limitations rather than showcasing his strengths. What should have been dream matchups for fans instead became painful reminders that his best days were behind him. While he did capture championship gold as part of a six-man tag team with Tommy Rich and Ricky Morton, this brief success was followed by an unceremonious disappearance from television after they dropped the titles. As the 1990s progressed, the once mighty Junkyard Dog found himself working small, independent shows in high school gyms and community centers. The crowds numbered in the hundreds rather than thousands. The paychecks diminished accordingly. Yet those who saw him during this period noted that despite everything, his love for wrestling remained undiminished. The smile was still there, albeit now masking deeper pain. The connection with fans, especially children, remained genuine even as his physical capabilities continued to decline. Where once he had commanded top dollar and main event status, Ritter now took whatever bookings came his way, traveling the independent circuit into the mid-1990s. His name still carried enough recognition to draw curious fans, but the gap between the Junkyard Dog of legend and the man now performing in the ring grew wider with each passing year. While crowds dwindled and bookings diminished, there was one role Sylvester Ritter never stopped performing with pride: being a father. On June 2, 1998, Ritter made the journey to North Carolina for his daughter LaToya's high school graduation. After years of struggling in small-town venues, this moment represented something genuine: watching his child accomplish what he could be truly proud of. But what should have been a celebration would instead mark the final chapter in the story of the Junkyard Dog. The graduation ceremony went perfectly. Ritter beamed with pride as LaToya walked across the stage, diploma in hand. This wasn't kayfabe or a wrestling angle. This was real life, a father witnessing his daughter's achievement. The moment held special significance given how his most famous storyline had centered around this very same daughter years earlier, when the Freebirds blinding him had prevented him from seeing her as a newborn. After the celebration, Ritter began the long drive back to his home in Mississippi. The highways stretched endlessly before him as night fell. We'll never know exactly what happened in those final moments, whether fatigue set in after the emotional day, if he fell asleep momentarily, or if something else caused him to lose control. What we do know is that on Interstate 20 near Forest, Mississippi, his car suddenly veered off the road and slammed into a tree. The impact was devastating. At just 45 years old, Sylvester Ritter, the man who had body-slammed giants and electrified arenas across America, was killed instantly in the single-vehicle accident. The date was June 2, 1998, barely 24 hours after he'd watched his daughter graduate. News of his death sent shockwaves through the wrestling community. The man who had innovated entrance music, broken racial barriers, and connected with fans of all backgrounds was suddenly gone. Tributes poured in from across the industry as wrestlers who had shared locker rooms with the charismatic performer struggled to process the loss. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had survived the brutal physical toll of professional wrestling for nearly 2 decades, who had endured countless bumps and bruises in rings across the country, had his life claimed not by the business but by a highway he'd traveled countless times before. The road that had taken him to so many wrestling venues had taken his life after what should have been one of his proudest personal moments. Perhaps most heartbreaking was what this revealed about the man behind the character. Far from the bright lights and roaring crowds, Ritter had been simply a father driving hundreds of miles to support his daughter's milestone achievement. In an industry where the line between character and performer often blurs, his final act was purely that of Sylvester Ritter the man, not Junkyard Dog, the wrestling persona. In death, as in his later career, indignities continued to follow Ritter. He was initially buried in an unmarked grave at Westview Memorial Park in Wadesboro, North Carolina. For over a decade, the final resting place of one of wrestling's most influential performers remained unmarked, until wrestling fans took action. In a testament to the lasting impact he had on audiences, fans raised money to provide Ritter with a proper grave marker, which was finally placed in November 2012, 14 years after his death. The circumstances surrounding LaToya weren't finished causing controversy either. Following Ritter's death, a wrestling promotion insensitively referenced her in a storyline, causing outrage among fans and industry insiders who felt it crossed ethical lines. Even in death, the business that had built him up wasn't above exploiting his memory and family connections. When Junkyard Dog was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2004, it was LaToya who accepted the honor on her father's behalf. Standing before an audience of wrestling royalty, She represented the human legacy of a performer whose impact had extended far beyond championship belts and arena attendance records. Championships don't tell the whole story. That Hall of Fame ceremony wasn't just another plaque on a wall. It was acknowledgement of a man who completely rewrote wrestling's unspoken racial rules. When LaToya Ritter accepted her father's WWE Hall of Fame induction in 2004, she represented something far greater than just another wrestling career. She stood as living proof of a revolution that had quietly transformed an entire industry. Despite this prestigious honor, many of today's wrestling fans have little understanding of just how profoundly Ritter changed the business. Before him, the idea of a black wrestler as the undisputed top attraction of a major territory was considered impossible. Ritter didn't just crack that ceiling, he shattered it completely, proving what industry veterans had deemed unthinkable: that audiences would pack arenas specifically to see a black superstar in the main event. The ripple effects of this breakthrough can be seen throughout modern wrestling. Stars like Booker T, Mark Henry, and even Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson have all cited Ritter as a critical influence in their careers. These weren't just token acknowledgments. They were recognition that Ritter had fundamentally altered what was possible for black performers in the industry. He wasn't just popular, he was transformative. That transformation continues today. When you see groups like the New Day enjoying massive popularity and merchandise success, you're witnessing his legacy in action. These performers have openly discussed how his pioneering work created the opportunities they now enjoy. Every time a black superstar steps out to headline a major event, literally had to fight to create. What made his impact so revolutionary wasn't just who he was, but how he connected with his audience. His approach to wrestling was fundamentally character-driven at a time when pure athleticism was still the primary focus. Ritter demonstrated that charisma and emotional connection could be more powerful drawing tools than technical wrestling skill. This philosophy would later become the cornerstone of wrestling's most successful era, as companies shifted from sport-focused presentations to character-driven entertainment. Perhaps most importantly, Ritter helped transform professional wrestling from an adult-oriented spectacle into family entertainment. His natural connection with children made wrestling accessible to audiences of all ages, expanding the demographic appeal of the entire industry. Long before WWE explicitly branded itself as family entertainment, Ritter was showing promoters the untapped potential of marketing to younger fans and their parents. What's remarkable about his influence is that he accomplished all this despite never winning a major world championship. In an industry obsessed with title reigns and championship lineages, Ritter proved that a wrestler's true impact can't be measured in gold belts alone. His merchandising popularity was astronomical, regularly selling out arenas like the New Orleans Superdome. Not because he was positioned as the champion, but because audiences genuinely connected with him as both a character and a person. Even decades after his tragic passing, tributes to Ritter continue throughout wrestling. Modern promotions regularly honor his contributions through storylines and special events, ensuring that his revolutionary impact isn't forgotten. The wrestling world recognizes that, without his groundbreaking success, the industry we know today might look dramatically different. His greatest achievement wasn't winning matches or championships. It was proving that wrestling fans would embrace performers based on their charisma and connection rather than their race. Before Ritter, industry wisdom claimed audiences wouldn't accept certain wrestlers in certain roles due to the color of their skin. Ritter didn't just prove that theory wrong, he made it look ridiculous in retrospect. His electrifying presence forced promoters to reconsider everything they thought they knew about audience preferences and marketing. More than 2 decades after his passing, Junkyard Dog's influence on professional wrestling continues to grow stronger. Modern wrestlers frequently cite Ritter as a direct inspiration for their careers, acknowledging the doors he opened for future generations. As WWE author Brian Shields noted, Ritter remains recognized as one of the most electrifying and charismatic wrestlers of his time, particularly during wrestling's transformative early 80s period. What truly measures a wrestler's impact isn't championship gold, but their lasting influence on the business itself. In 2012, wrestling fans demonstrated this truth when they funded a proper marker for Junkyard Dog's previously unmarked grave. placing it just before WrestleMania 20 as a profound gesture of respect. The tributes that continue pouring in from both fans and fellow wrestlers speak to something more meaningful than title reigns. In wrestling, true greatness isn't counted in championship belts, but in how you change the business forever. Ritter may have left us too soon, but his chain-wearing, barrier-breaking legacy lives on every time entrance music hits, every time demographics unite behind a charismatic performer, and every time a black wrestler stands in the spotlight he helped create. Check out this video from our new channel, showcasing the most jaw-dropping moments when WWE superstars' clothes were stolen. Like and subscribe for 100 years of luck. Until next time.